The cold tile presses against my cheek. Dust motes dance in the single shaft of light slicing through the blinds. I can smell the faint, sweet scent of baby powder and the metallic tang of my own adrenaline drying on my skin. It's quiet. Too quiet. The house holds its breath around me. Outside, a bird sings oblivious. Inside, a universe has just imploded. My universe. My chest feels hollow, like a cave where wind howls, carrying echoes of words I can't unhear.
Fired.
Maternity leave. Redundant. The corporate jargon wraps around the raw, bleeding wound like barbed wire. I trace the pattern of the grout with a trembling finger, wishing I could disappear into the microscopic canyons. The silence isn't peace. It's the stunned quiet after an explosion, before the ringing in your ears subsides and the real damage becomes clear. My daughter sleeps upstairs, innocent, warm, a perfect, fragile weight in a world I no longer understand. A world that just discarded me like yesterday's trash, at the very moment I felt most vulnerable, most essential to another human being. The injustice is a bitter bile rising in my throat. It chokes me, burns. Redundant.
Me?
Redundant? While I was bringing a new life into this world, a life I risked my own body to protect and nurture, they were apparently deciding my career. My years of dedication, my sacrifices, were no longer necessary. The word itself feels like a physical blow, a dismissal not just of my job title, but of my worth, my identity, my contribution to the very life they claim to value. I taste salt.
Tears.
They mingle with the lingering scent of baby powder on my cheek.
This isn't just about a job.
This is about a betrayal so profound it shakes the foundations of everything I thought I knew about loyalty, about merit, about the basic decency you expect from the people you give your life to, 50, 60, 70 hours a week. It's a punch to the gut delivered when my hands were already full, my body recovering, my mind adjusting to the monumental, beautiful, terrifying task of motherhood. It's cowardly, it's cruel, and it is irrevocably, fundamentally wrong. The world outside is still singing. The sun still shines. But for me, everything has just gone dark. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Just knowing someone else is out there sharing this space helps more than you know. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me tell these stories. Before the silence, before the dust motes and the cold tile, there was the hum. The hum of a life lived at speed, precisely calibrated. My life. I was good at it. Really good. My job wasn't just a job, it was an extension of me. Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives. The title felt important, substantial. I'd earned it, clawed my way up through late nights, early mornings, missed weekends, postponed vacations. I built teams, closed deals, steered projects that shaped the company's trajectory. I knew the systems, the people, the unspoken rules, the invisible currents that determine success or failure. The office was a second home, a place where I felt sharp, capable, powerful in my own quiet way. The glass walls of my corner office overlooked the city, a glittering testament to ambition and achievement. I felt a kinship with that skyline, a sense of belonging to the relentless pulse of the metropolis below. And then there was Mark, my husband, my rock. He worked in finance, a different world of markets and numbers and incomprehensible jargon, but his ambition mirrored mine. We were a power couple, people whispered. It wasn't a label we sought, but it fit. We understood each other's drives, the sacrifices required. Our home was an oasis, a place to recharge before diving back into the fray. We built it together, brick by brick, dream by dream. The hum of our life wasn't just work. It was the comfortable rhythm of two people moving in sync, building something together, a future we envisioned with shared success and, eventually, a family. When we decided to start a family, it felt like the next logical step, the ultimate project. There was fear, of course. How would it change things? Could I be the executive I was and the mother I wanted to be? We talked through the logistics, the childcare plans, the juggling act that lay ahead. Mark was supportive, unwavering. We could do this, he said. We were a team. My company had a good maternity leave policy.
Standard.
12 weeks. Unpaid after 6, but I had saved. I planned. I prepped my team for my absence, handed over projects, created detailed guides. I was leaving nothing to chance. I wanted to ensure a seamless transition, to prove that I was indispensable, even when I wasn't physically there. My boss, David, a man who measured loyalty in billable hours and enthusiasm in late-night emails, had clapped me on the back, a rare gesture from him. "You've earned this, Sarah," he'd said, his eyes already darting to the next task on his screen. "We'll miss you, but we'll be ready for you when you get back. Big things planned, big things." The words resonated, filling me with a sense of anticipation, not just for the baby, but for the career trajectory that awaited my return. I imagined coming back refreshed, refocused, ready to tackle those big things he mentioned. Ready to prove that motherhood had only sharpened my edge, not dulled it. That I was still the same driven, capable woman who had helped build his department into a powerhouse. My last day before leave was a whirlwind of handshakes, well wishes, and the strange, surreal feeling of stepping off a treadmill that had been my lifeblood for years. The office felt different, already alien. I walked out into the evening air, lighter in some ways, heavier in others, carrying the weight of expectation, my own and the company's. The next chapter was beginning. The hum of my life was about to change tempo, soften, become something gentler, more profound. The first few weeks of motherhood were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Every tiny yawn, every fluttering eyelid, every helpless cry pulled at a part of me I never knew existed. My daughter, Lily, was perfect. Small, fragile, utterly dependent. My career, the office, the deadlines, they faded into a distant hum, replaced by the urgent, immediate rhythm of feeding, changing, soothing, loving. I was lost in the beautiful, exhausting bubble of new parenthood. Emails from the office were few and far between, mostly administrative. My team seemed to be managing. David sent one perfunctory note wishing me well. I wasn't worried. My plan was working. They were fine without me, which meant my preparation was solid. And I would be back, ready to reclaim my place. Then came the call.
It was a Tuesday.
The kind of Tuesday where the sun felt warm on my face through the living room window, where Lily had finally, miraculously, slept for a solid 3 hours, and I was allowing myself the luxury of a cup of hot coffee and 5 minutes of quiet before the next feed, the next change, the next demand.
My phone rang.
It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Maternity leave was for ignoring calls, wasn't it? But some residual corporate wiring, made me answer. Sarah Miller? A voice, crisp, unfamiliar. Speaking, my voice was soft, modulated for the sleeping baby in the next room. "This is Richard Sterling from HR.
HR.
My stomach tightened. This wasn't a check-in call. "Yes, Richard? We're calling to inform you of some recent restructuring within your department. As of today, your position has been made redundant." The words hung in the air, heavy, absurd. Redundant. Again, that word. It echoed off the walls of my quiet house, shattering the peace. My hand shook, spilling hot coffee onto the rug. I didn't notice. Redundant. I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "I'm on maternity leave." "Yes, we understand that." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "The restructuring decisions were made based on current business needs and future projections. It's not a reflection of your performance, Sarah. Not a reflection of my performance." The ultimate corporate lie. Of course, it was a reflection of something. It was a reflection of their decision to see me as disposable. To see my absence, the necessary biological, human absence required to bring a new life into the world, as an opportunity to cut costs, to streamline, to discard.
Who?
Who made this decision? My voice was barely a whisper. The executive committee, in conjunction with department heads. David. It had to be David. He was the department head. He was the one who had clapped me on the back, wished me well, talked of big things waiting for my return. He knew I was on leave. He knew I had just had a baby.
And he did this anyway.
I don't understand. I prepared extensively for my leave. My team is managing. I was planning to return in 2 months. We understand this is difficult news, Sarah. We will be mailing you a severance package and details regarding benefits continuation.
Severance.
Benefits. The language of corporate divorce.
But why now?
While I'm on leave. As I said, the decisions were based on business needs. We wish you the best in your future endeavors.
Click.
The line went dead. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone, then the silence again. The silence felt different now. It wasn't peaceful, it was deafening, filled with the screaming injustice of those few short sentences. Redundant. While on maternity leave. Fired. My legs gave out. I sank to the floor, landing awkwardly on the cold tile. The spilled coffee was a dark, spreading stain. It felt symbolic. Everything felt stained. My career, my trust, my sense of security. They had waited until I was at my most vulnerable, my most distracted, my most physically and emotionally taxed. They had waited until my hands were full, quite literally, caring for a newborn. And then they had delivered the blow. It wasn't just a professional setback. It felt like a personal attack. A cruel, calculated move designed to leave me reeling, off balance, with no immediate recourse. How could I fight this? How could I mount a legal challenge, launch a job search, network, interview, when my entire being was focused on the tiny, fragile life I held in my arms? The tears came then, not the quiet tears of exhaustion, but the gut-wrenching sobs of betrayal and shock. They shook my body, made my chest ache. Lily stirred upstairs, a small, fretful sound. I had to stop. I had to be strong for her. But how could I be strong when I felt so completely broken? They had taken something vital from me, something I had built with years of effort and sacrifice. They had undermined my identity, my confidence, my ability to provide. And they had done it in the cruelest, most cowardly way possible. The rage came next, hot and sharp, cutting through the grief. David. He had done this. The man I had worked under, worked for, worked alongside for years. He had seen my maternity leave not as a human necessity, but as a corporate inconvenience to be eliminated. The casual brutality of it was stunning. It wasn't just business. It felt personal. A cold, calculated act of professional assassination executed while I was literally recovering from childbirth. Getting fired while on maternity leave isn't just losing a job. It's losing your footing in the world just as you're trying to navigate a completely new, challenging terrain. The initial shock gave way to a crushing weight of worry. Money.
Bills.
The future. How quickly the solid ground of a stable career can dissolve, leaving you scrambling on shifting sands. I tried to tell myself it would be okay. That I was good, I was experienced, I would find something else. But the job market isn't kind of gaps on your resume, especially not gaps marked, fired while on leave. Each online application felt like shouting into a void. The automated rejection emails piled up, cold and impersonal. Thank you for your interest, but we have decided to move forward with other candidates. Your qualifications do not align. It was a constant drip of negation, eroding my confidence further with each notification. Then there were the subtle interactions, the ones that cut deepest. Conversations with former colleagues who suddenly seemed awkward, distant. Emails that went unanswered. The feeling of being slowly erased from the professional world I had inhabited for so long. It wasn't just the loss of income, it was the loss of identity, the loss of purpose beyond the immediate demands of motherhood. While I adored Lily, the feeling of being professionally irrelevant, disposable, gnawed at me. It was a constant, low-grade ache beneath the surface of my new life. David, my former boss, seemed to be thriving. I couldn't help but check LinkedIn, a morbid curiosity driving me. Promotions. New hires in my old department, people filling the gap I had left, solidifying my redundancy. His posts were full of buzzwords, success metrics, team wins. He was building his empire on the ashes of my career, or so it felt. The injustice burned brighter every time I saw his smiling face next to some corporate milestone. He was being rewarded for the very act that had devastated my life. Mark saw it, felt it too.
The stress mounted.
The late-night talks weren't about the baby's milestones anymore, but about budgets, savings, the dwindling runway we had. His work was demanding, and he carried the weight of now being the sole breadwinner. I saw the worry lines deepen around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He was doing his best to be supportive, to tell me it wasn't my fault, that we would figure it out. But the unspoken pressure was always there. We were a team, yes, but the foundation of our shared professional ambition had cracked, leaving me feeling like a liability instead of a partner. I considered fighting back legally. I consulted with an employment lawyer. He listened patiently, nodded, reviewed my case. "It's difficult," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Proving discrimination based on maternity leave is challenging. Companies are smart. They'll claim restructuring. Business needs we can send a letter, perhaps negotiate a better severance, but a full lawsuit. It would be long, expensive, emotionally draining. And there's no guarantee of success, no guarantee." The thought of years tied up in court, reliving the betrayal, draining our precious savings on legal fees, all for an uncertain outcome. It felt overwhelming. I was already exhausted, emotionally raw. I couldn't put my family through that. The legal path seemed like a dead end. The days bled into weeks, then months. Lily grew, reaching new milestones, her laughter a bright counterpoint to the dull ache in my chest. But the financial pressure didn't ease. Our savings were depleting faster than we anticipated. The job search remained fruitless. The feeling of being trapped, of having my career stolen from me at the most vulnerable moment, intensified. I felt a growing resentment towards David, a bitter anger that simmered beneath the surface. It wasn't just about the job anymore, it was about the principle, the callous disregard for my humanity, my commitment. He had taken something from me that felt irreplaceable, something tied to my sense of self-worth built over a decade of hard work. One evening, after Lily was asleep, Mark found me sitting in the dark living room, staring blankly at the wall. I hadn't even turned on the TV. I felt hollowed out, defeated. The last rejection email had arrived that afternoon, for a position that felt like a perfect fit. It was the final straw. I felt the fragile mask of composure I wore cracking. "Hey," he said softly, sitting beside me, taking my hand. His hand was warm, grounding. I couldn't speak at first. Just shook my head, tears silently tracing paths down my cheeks. "Still nothing?" he asked, though he knew the answer. I nodded. "I don't know what to do, Mark." I finally managed, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I feel like I'm drowning. Everything I worked for. It's just
gone.
And he's winning." Mark squeezed my hand. He was quiet for a long moment. I could feel him thinking, processing. He wasn't just my husband. He was a strategist, a problem solver by profession. I had confided in him about David's role, about the blatant timing of the firing. He had seen my anger, my hurt. Maybe fighting him head-on isn't the way," Mark said slowly, his gaze fixed on the darkness outside the window. "What else is there?" I asked, bitterness creeping into my tone. "He took everything. He played dirty. And he got away with it." Mark turned to me, his eyes serious. What if there's another way? A different game board?" I looked at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" He leaned closer. "His company. It's public, right? Who owns it?" "Shareholders, obviously. Big ones." "Exactly," Mark said, a flicker of something I hadn't seen in a while in his eyes. Strategic interest. "And who influences shareholder decisions? Who appoints the board? Who approves executive positions?" "The board of directors," I said, still not seeing his point. "And who influences the board?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air. "The chairman of the board." He said it quietly, almost casually, but the words landed with the force of a physical blow. I stared at him. Mark. Finance. Networks. Influence. His world. It was a completely different system of power than the corporate hierarchy I knew. One I had never fully appreciated until this moment. Are you saying? I have connections, Sarah, Mark said, his voice gaining a quiet intensity. In those circles. Big circles. Board-level circles. People who know people. People who have influence. People who might be interested in knowing that a senior director was let go while on maternity leave, especially if that decision seemed short-sighted or made for,
shall we say,
less than strategic reasons. A cold, unfamiliar sensation began to spread through me. It wasn't the cold of despair, but something sharper, more potent. The cold calculation of strategy. A different kind of power. Not climbing the corporate ladder, but understanding the hands that built and controlled the ladder itself. You mean, you could do something? My voice trembled slightly, hope and fear warring within me. This was his world. Could he really navigate it in a way that could impact my world, my injustice? It wouldn't be easy, Mark cautioned, and it wouldn't be fast. These things take time. Building consensus, positioning pieces, waiting for the right moment. How long? Months. Maybe longer. It's a slow game, but it could be effective. More effective than a lawsuit. More permanent.
Permanent.
The word lingered. It wasn't about getting my old job back. It was about something bigger. About a fundamental imbalance being corrected. About the person who had wielded power callously facing a reckoning from a power he didn't control. What would you do? I'd start talking, Mark said, a slow, careful smile forming. Making introductions. Planting seeds. Asking questions in the right rooms. About the company's performance, yes, but also about its leadership decisions. Its values. Whether the current leadership is truly serving the shareholders' best interests in the long term. He didn't need to spell it out. Questioning leadership on the grounds of competence or ethical judgment was a far more powerful weapon in the boardroom than a personal discrimination claim. If David's decision could be framed not just as cruel, but as poor judgment, as a sign of flawed leadership that might negatively impact the company's value or reputation, then the board might listen. And if they listened, things could change.
Drastically.
My mind raced. This wasn't a direct confrontation. It was a flanking maneuver, a strategic siege. It meant giving up the idea of immediate justice, of a quick win. It meant waiting, trusting. It meant placing my vindication, my sense of closure, not in my own hands, but in Mark's and in the intricate, opaque world of high finance and corporate governance that he inhabited. Can you really do it? I asked, needing to hear him say it, not just imply it. Mark looked at me, his gaze steady. I can try. I have the contacts. I have the understanding of how these structures work. It won't be guaranteed. It might not work.
But
it's a path. A path where winning isn't just getting a settlement. Winning could mean
a fundamental shift.
At the top. A fundamental shift at the top. David's top. The man who had signed off on my dismissal. The man who felt untouchable. The idea, initially just a flicker, began to ignite something within me. It wasn't just hope. It was a cold, sharp determination. If the legal system couldn't deliver justice, maybe the corporate system could. Wielded correctly from the shadows, by someone who understood its levers of power. Okay, I said, the word feeling small but significant in the quiet room. Okay, Mark, let's do it. It was a pact, a pivot, the midpoint shift. We weren't just passively enduring the injustice anymore. We were actively plotting our countermove. And the game had just moved to Mark's turf. The decision made, a fragile sense of purpose returned, but it was tempered by the agonizing reality of the slow game, months stretched ahead, filled with silent, covert activity on Mark's part and a relentless, public struggle on mine. While Mark worked his network, attending dinners, playing golf, making carefully worded inquiries, I was still living the day-to-day reality of being unemployed. The job search continued, a demoralizing exercise in rejection. The financial strain tightened its grip. We cut expenses, ate in, canceled memberships. Every grocery bill, every utility payment felt like a small victory against a looming threat. Meanwhile, David's star continued to rise. I would hear snippets through old colleagues or see articles online. He was lauded for streamlining, for cutting costs, for optimizing. It felt like a cruel joke. His optimization had cost me my career, my stability, my peace of mind. The narrative was that he was a brilliant, ruthless executive, making tough but necessary decisions. The reality, for me, was that he was a coward who fired a woman on maternity leave because he saw her absence as an easy way to hit his targets. The deepening crisis wasn't a single event. It was the slow, insidious erosion of hope, the constant pressure, the feeling that the walls were closing in. Mark's work was invisible to me. He would come home from late nights out, tired but tight-lipped. Progress. I'd ask, my voice laced with anxiety. Things are moving, he'd say. It takes time. Trust the process, trust the process. It was Mark's mantra, born of his world where deals took months or years to close, where relationships were built over decades, where leverage was accumulated patiently, silently. But my world felt immediate, pressing. Bills arrived. Savings dwindled. My job search yielded only polite refusals. Doubt began to creep in. Was Mark's plan just a pipe dream? A way to make me feel better? Was this really going to work? Could whispers in boardrooms in one corner of the city really topple an executive in a completely different company, a man who seemed so secure, so powerful? There were moments of intense frustration. I would see David's face in a business journal, hear his name mentioned positively, and the unfairness of it all would overwhelm me. He was out there, celebrated, successful, completely unaware of the quiet storm brewing in the background, the one Mark was carefully cultivating. It felt like he had won, irrevocably, that his cruel act had been rewarded, while I was left scrambling. The stress took its toll. I was short-tempered, anxious. Lily, bless her, was a bright spot, a constant source of unconditional love, but even caring for her felt heavier under the weight of financial worry and professional uncertainty. Mark and I snapped at each other more often. The strain was fraying the edges of our relationship. He was carrying the financial burden, and I felt guilty, useless. My identity had been so tied to my career, and without it, I felt adrift. Maybe we should just stop, I said to Mark one night, the words torn from me by exhaustion and despair. Maybe it's not going to happen. Maybe he's just too entrenched, too powerful. We're just driving ourselves crazy, spending money, waiting for something that might never come. Mark stopped what he was doing, turned to face me. His expression was tired, but his eyes held a familiar intensity. Never, he said, his voice quiet but firm. We don't stop.
Not now.
We're too far in. The pieces are in motion. But what if it fails? I asked, the fear raw in my voice. What do we do then?
Then.
We figure that out when we get there, he said. But we don't give up now. Not when we're this close. This close? I didn't feel close. I felt miles away from any kind of resolution, trapped in a perpetual state of waiting and struggling. It felt like rock bottom. The job search was a dead end, the legal route impossible, and the long-game plan felt increasingly like a fantasy. The future looked bleak. I imagined years of struggling, of never fully recovering my career, of David's continued success serving as a constant reminder of the injustice. The deepening crisis was the realization that this wasn't a temporary setback. It felt like a permanent derailment. All seemed lost. The silent weight, the unseen work, felt inadequate against the very visible, very successful reality of the man who had wronged me. The turning point wasn't a sudden revelation, but a slow, hardening resolve that grew in the face of despair. It was a decision forged in the crucible of job rejections, dwindling finances, and the simmering rage that refused to dissipate. We couldn't afford to lose. Not just financially, but emotionally. The alternative, living with the injustice, watching David thrive, felt like a slow death of the spirit. Mark's cryptic updates continued. Things are accelerating, he'd say. There's movement. A few key people are asking questions. He started spending more time on calls, his voice low, serious. He was building something, brick by invisible brick, using the intricate architecture of corporate power. I didn't understand the specifics, the proxy votes, the board nominations, the shareholder activism, but I understood the intent. He was creating a wave, a ripple that would eventually, hopefully, turn into a tsunami aimed directly at David's corner office. My role was different. It was about endurance, about holding the fort, managing the household on a shoestring, continuing the fruitless job search to maintain the appearance of normalcy, and most importantly, not breaking. Not letting the despair consume me. I had to trust Mark. I had to believe in the unseen process, the quiet maneuvering behind closed doors. It was a test of faith, of patience, of sheer stubbornness. We started to talk about the plan in more concrete terms, though still in hushed tones after Lily was asleep. Mark explained the timeline, the potential scenarios, the risks. It all hinged on the upcoming annual shareholder meeting. That was the crucible, the moment when influence translated into action, when votes were cast, when leadership was affirmed or challenged. The target wasn't just David. It was the current chairman of the board, the man under whom David had been allowed to operate. If Mark and his allies could unseat the chairman, a cascade of changes would follow, including, inevitably, a review of key executives like David. And Mark. Mark was positioning himself, quietly, strategically, for a potential board seat, maybe even the chairmanship itself. When he said the words, "I might be nominated for chairman," the reality of the plan hit me with full force. This wasn't just about getting revenge for my firing. This was about Mark ascending to a position of significant power within the company that had discarded me. It was audacious. It was risky. But it was also the ultimate vindication, not just for me, but for the principle that competence and integrity should matter, and that treating employees with callous disregard could have consequences, even at the highest levels. My despair began to transform into a fierce determination. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a participant, albeit a quiet one, in a high-stakes game. My struggle, my betrayal, had become the catalyst for something much bigger. I stopped focusing on the fruitless job search and started focusing on supporting Mark, on managing the stress, on being the solid ground he needed while he navigated the treacherous currents of corporate politics. My fight wasn't on LinkedIn or in cover letters anymore. It was in the quiet strength I found within myself, in the unwavering belief I had in Mark, in the absolute certainty that David's actions deserved a reckoning. The waiting was the hardest part. The tension built with each passing week. The annual meeting date loomed, a finish line I both yearned for and dreaded. What if it didn't work? What if Mark's network wasn't strong enough? What if the old guard held firm? The possibility of failure was terrifying, but the prospect of success, of seeing David face the consequences of his actions, fueled my resolve. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about reclaiming a sense of agency, of proving that you couldn't treat people this way without consequence. The turning point was the moment I fully committed to the long game, to the unseen battle, to the possibility that our quiet, patient strategy could ultimately deliver a justice that the conventional routes could not. The struggle wasn't over, but I was no longer just enduring it. I was part of a plan, and that made all the difference. The day of the annual shareholder meeting arrived like a storm front. The air felt thick with anticipation, heavy with unspoken tension. I wasn't a shareholder, not in this company, but I was going. Mark insisted. "You need to be there," he said, his voice steady. "You need to see it." See him. He arranged for me to have a visitor pass. I dressed carefully, choosing a suit I hadn't worn since before Lily was born, a suit that felt like armor. It was a small act, but it felt significant. I wasn't just the woman who was fired while on maternity leave. I was the woman who was here to witness the potential downfall of the man who did it. We arrived at the corporate headquarters, the same gleaming tower I used to look up at from the street, the one where I had spent countless hours building my career. The lobby was grand, impersonal. There was a buzz in the air, a subtle undercurrent of excitement and unease that only those initiated in the world of corporate maneuvering would recognize. Shareholders, analysts, executives, board members. They moved through the space with practiced ease, their faces carefully neutral or radiating quiet confidence. David was there. I saw him across the crowded room, talking animatedly to a group of people. He looked exactly the same, confident, self-important, oblivious. My stomach twisted, seeing him, thriving, in that building where he had dismissed me so casually, reignited the simmering rage within me. He looked untouchable. Could we really do this? Doubt, a constant, unwelcome companion during the long wait, clawed at me. Mark was calm, preternaturally calm. He introduced me to a few people, allies he had cultivated over the past year. They were polite, professional, their eyes holding a flicker of understanding, or perhaps just curiosity about the woman at the center of this quiet storm. We took our seats in the auditorium where the meeting would be held. The room was large, sterile, dominated by a stage and a large screen displaying the company logo. The meeting began. Routine presentations, financial performance, strategic outlook. David was called up to present on his department's achievements. He spoke with confidence, highlighting his successful cost-saving measures that included making my position redundant. I watched him, my hands clenched in my lap. He had no idea that the woman he had so casually discarded was sitting just feet away, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the plan to unfold. The agenda moved to the election of the board of directors. This was it, the moment of truth. The nominations were read out. Mark's name was among them. A few others. Then came the vote for chairman. The current chairman, a man who had presided over the board for over a decade, was nominated. And then, Mark's name was nominated. The room stirred. It was happening. The voting process felt interminable. Paper ballots collected. A quiet huddle of tellers. The tension in the room was palpable now, a thick, suffocating blanket. Everyone knew this wasn't a routine election. This was a challenge, a power struggle playing out in real time. Then the announcement. The teller stepped up to the microphone. The results for the election of chairman of the board are as follows. My heart hammered against my ribs. I held my breath. Mark sat beside me, his face impassive, giving nothing away. By a vote of 58% to 42%. The new chairman of the board is Mark Carter. A ripple of murmurs, then applause, spread through the room. It wasn't thunderous, not unanimous, but it was decisive. Mark had won. He had done it. From being the husband of the woman fired while on maternity leave, he was now the most powerful figure on the company's board. Mark rose, shaking hands with the outgoing chairman, acknowledging the applause with a small, formal nod. His eyes met mine across the distance, and in them, I saw not just victory, but a deep, quiet understanding. This wasn't just his win. It was our win. Then, the moment I had been waiting for, the moment that had fueled me through months of struggle and doubt. The new chairman, Mark, addressed the board. He spoke of vision, of shareholder value, of strategic direction. And then he spoke of something else. My first order of business, Mark said, his voice clear and steady, commanding the attention of the room, will be a comprehensive review of executive leadership, particularly in divisions that have seen significant personnel changes or shifts in performance narratives. We need to ensure that our leadership team is aligned with the company's values and long-term interests. This review will begin immediately, starting with the Strategic Initiatives Department. Strategic Initiatives. David's department. The air left the room. You could feel the collective intake of breath. David, who had been looking smug just moments before, went visibly pale. His smile faltered, frozen on his face. His eyes darted around the room, searching, understanding dawning, slow and horrifying. He hadn't just fired me. He had fired the wife of the man who was now his boss's boss. The plot twist wasn't just that I won, it was how completely blindsided he was. He had seen me as irrelevant, powerless. He had no idea of the network, the influence, the quiet, patient plan being executed in the background. The silence in the room stretched, thick with anticipation. All eyes were now on David. His face contorted. The color drained completely, leaving him ashen. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. He looked like a cornered animal, suddenly realizing the trap he had walked into. All his confidence, his swagger, evaporated in an instant. He understood. He understood that the restructuring he had so casually enacted was now about to be applied to him, from a level he could never have anticipated. And then it happened. The scream. It was a raw, guttural sound, ripped from his gut. Not words, just pure, animalistic rage and shock. A sound of utter disbelief and defeat. He pointed a trembling finger towards Mark, towards me, his face a mask of fury and horror. You can't, he shrieked, his voice cracking. You faked it. This is retaliation. You engineered this. Security moved towards him, but he was already collapsing, not physically, but collapsing inward. The controlled facade shattered. He was screaming accusations now, nonsensical, desperate. The chairman, the board, the shareholders, they watched, stunned, as the executive they had just heard tout his successes came undone before their eyes. His public disintegration was complete. The powerful man who had fired me via a cold HR call was now a screaming, broken figure being escorted from the room. The room remained silent for a moment after he was gone, the echoes of his scream hanging in the air. Mark, now chairman, simply nodded, his expression serious. As I was saying, he continued, as if nothing untoward had happened, the review begins immediately. The climax wasn't just Mark becoming chairman, it was David's public, shattering realization that his callous act had not only come back to haunt him, but had done so in the most devastating way possible, orchestrated by the very people he had wronged. It was the scream that sealed it, the raw, unfiltered confession of a man who had just been utterly, perfectly blindsided. He hadn't just lost his job, he had lost his power, his reputation, everything, in one swift, brutal, and utterly satisfying move. Walking out of that building felt different this time. It wasn't the uncertainty of my last day of work, stepping into the unknown of motherhood. It wasn't the devastation after the firing, feeling discarded and powerless. This was something else. A quiet exultation, a profound sense of vindication, mixed with a strange, almost melancholic emptiness. We didn't speak much on the way home. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full, heavy with unspoken emotions. Mark drove, his hands relaxed on the wheel, the tension that had been coiled inside him for months finally released. I looked out the window, watching the city lights blur. The skyscraper where the meeting had just ended stood tall against the twilight sky, no longer a symbol of my defeat, but a monument to a different kind of victory. Back home, the house was quiet. Lily was asleep, her breathing soft, and even in the baby monitor. The mundane reality of our lives asserted itself, a gentle counterpoint to the corporate drama that had just unfolded. We sat on the sofa, side by side, the stillness amplifying the magnitude of what had happened. He screamed. I said, the memory of David's raw, broken cry still vivid. Mark nodded.
Yeah,
He did.
did you? Did you know he'd react like that?
Mark shrugged. I knew he wouldn't take it well.
But
That?
no.
I don't think anyone expected that, he paused. He had no idea, did he? About us. About the plan. None, I confirmed. He just saw a woman on maternity leave. An easy cut. He never saw you. He never saw this. The justice of it felt immense, overwhelming. He had been so arrogant, so secure in his power. And we, working quietly, patiently, using a different kind of power, had brought his world crashing down. It wasn't just revenge. It felt like a fundamental rebalancing. He had abused his power, and the system, albeit a different part of it, had corrected itself. But the victory wasn't purely sweet. It came at a cost. The months of stress, the financial strain, the erosion of my confidence, the toll on our marriage, those weren't erased by David's downfall. They were scars, reminders of the battle we had fought. And Mark's new position. It was powerful, yes, but also demanding. His life was about to get exponentially more complex, more pressured. What happens now? I asked, not just about David, but about everything. For him, Mark said, his voice flat. The review will be quick. My guess is he's out within days. His public performance didn't help his case. And for us?
For me.
Mark turned to me, his eyes warm.
For us.
We rebuild. Stronger. Different.
You.
You get to decide what you want now, Sarah. The pressure is off. You have time. Space. Time and space. The most precious commodities after months of feeling suffocated and rushed. The vindication wasn't just about David's fall. It was about reclaiming my agency, my future. I didn't want my old job back. Not anymore. That chapter was closed. But I could build something new. Something on my own terms, not defined by someone else's decision to discard me. The lessons learned were etched deep. The corporate world could be brutal, unforgiving. Loyalty was often a one-way street. Power took many forms, and the most effective might not be the most visible. And true strength wasn't just about fighting hard. It was about understanding the landscape, finding allies, being patient, and knowing when and how to strike. We had faced a crisis, a betrayal, and we had overcome it, not through conventional means, but through a quiet, strategic defiance. David's scream wasn't just the sound of his defeat. It was the sound of a system correcting itself, of power being wielded not for callous self-interest, but for something resembling justice. It was the end of one story, and the quiet, hopeful beginning of another. The path ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, but we would face them together, a team forged stronger by the fire we had walked through. The cold tile, the spilled coffee, the suffocating silence, they were memories now, replaced by the quiet hum of a life rebuilt, a future reclaimed. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version, your thoughts, your own moments of quiet strength. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.